down the middle. So I give you two samples here of what I'm looking for. Okay, sample one, it's a function. Obviously, they're both functions. Okay. Sample one, the function return middle is accepting an array of even size. That's odd size. Function two is accepting as an argument an array of even size. And essentially, if the array is odd size, i.e. odd arrays have a middle element, right? We looked at that yesterday. Odd amounts of numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, odd amounts of numbers. There are 5 numbers, so there's an easy to define middle. And that's, in this case, the value 3. However, evens, they don't have an easy to define middle. The middle is found between 3 and 4. When the middle is found between two numbers, instead what we want to return is an array containing both the lower and the higher number. Okay? And so that's what we're going to build, and the function that we're going to build is called return middle. Okay? Here is how we can write it as an arrow function. Any function can be an arrow function. Okay, so this is your arrow function, my array, and that's going to be that array. So it's pretty much, we took out the word function, and we also took out the parentheses around the parameter because there's only one. If there was multiple parameters, we do have to include those parentheses, or if there's 0 parameters, we also need to include those parentheses, just empty parentheses. But there's one in this case, my array. Okay? And semicolon at the end because it's a function expression, and we're assigning it to a variable. So that assignment to the variable forces a semicolon at the end. Okay, so the first thing we need to do with our parameter here, my array, is determine whether or not it's odd or even, right? Because we need to know whether or not we're in this situation or we're in this situation. At least that's what I think of in my head. Okay? Do we have an array of this size or do we have an array of this size? This is even, this is odd. So what's a really easy way to tell if something is odd or even?
Use mod.
Mod 2. Mod 2 equals 0, even. Mod 2 equals 1, odd. So we're going to use a little if statement here. And what are we checking to see if it's odd or even?
Return middle.length.
The length of the array, right? Because that's going to tell us how many elements this array has. Okay, so my array dot length will tell me how many elements of the array. 7, 8, 9. Mod 2, and this is either going to be 0 or 1. If it's 0, that means it's even. Do the even stuff here. Otherwise, do the odd stuff. Okay? Let's pick the odd one first, because the odd one is easy, right? The odd, all we have to do is get one number, pull it out, and return it. Now I'm going to draw little indexes on top of this one here, so we can more easily and readily identify maybe what our general pattern is. Usually when I'm coming up with solutions to problems, I like to pick the problem specifically. So for example, I'm going to work with this array specifically, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to do this so that it works with this array first and only. And then hopefully the idea that I have that works for this array will also work for all other arrays, or all other problem sets, all other pieces of data for that problem. So I'm going to do that over here though with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So indexes at the top. 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So I want to return the middle element. Which element is the middle element in the array on the board 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Index 2.
Index 2. So I need to figure out the number. I want to get to the number 2. How do I get to the number 2? What's using some of the pieces of information I have? How do I normally find half of something? Divide by 2. Okay. So length 5. Divide by 2. Ugh.
No.
That's not really nice. What do I end up with?
2.5.
2.5. Okay.
Or at one.
But this is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
This is pretty close. There are ways of modifying this so it can always drop down, round down. Right? There's a couple ways that I can do this. What would happen instead of using 5 if I just used 4?
And you line that 2.
Then I end up at 2. And if okay, cool, perfect. So now I can just say 5 minus 1 divided by 2, and I end up with 3. And the element at index 2, which is 3. Does that same concept work for bigger arrays? So if I was over here, what is length? 7. 7 divided by 2, 3.5. Not ideal. 7 minus 1 divided by 2, 3. 0, 1, 2, 3, and I get 4. Perfect. Okay, so that seems like a fairly reasonable general solution. Now, there might be, with a general solution like that, it might work for 2 or 3, but then, and that is awesome, right? It might work for 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 cases, but oftentimes it won't work for some cases. And those are not cases I need you to handle right now, but these cases are usually called edge cases or corner cases. Okay? An edge case here would be empty array. What happens? And we end up with some pretty weird stuff, actually. My array.length mod 2 would be 0, mod 2 equals 0. Yeah, we'd end up with some, so like, I actually don't know, I'd have to work it out, but in real life, you may have to deal with stuff like that. You might have a solution that works for 99 out of 101 different scenarios, but it doesn't work for this one. It doesn't work for that one. And so we have to be sometimes really careful about the generic solution that we figure out. Usually we'll have a generic solution that handles most of the stuff, and then right below that we'll have special cases. If it doesn't fit into either of these two, it fits into this one. Or return, we can't do this. Okay, so we're gonna take this idea, my array dot length minus 1, divide the whole thing by 2, and this is going to give us our index, right? So I can just say my array. brackets, because this gives me an index 2 or 3. So this chunk of code that I have highlighted, this evaluates to an integer. This evaluates to a number, which means it's reasonable to assume that if I can put numbers in these square brackets to represent an index that retrieves an element for me, that I can put something, an expression that evaluates to a number within there. Okay? We good? And this gives me this whole expression. What does that evaluate to? What does that give me? What is, at the end, after line 6 is done running, what does this expression evaluate to?
The result.
An element of the array, okay. Well, what is the element of the array? What's in the element?
The middle array, or the middle index of
The middle index, the middle element, but what's in there?
number, integer.
A number. What number does this evaluate to in this case?
4.
Return 4. That's what that says. Return 4. So you can see as we're digging further and further into this stuff, it starts to get a little bit more complicated, a little bit harder to read. And maybe now you can start to appreciate the importance of syntax, variable naming, right? We've got enough problems with reading code. We don't need additional problems by calling variables x, y, z, a1, b1. We use those in very specific cases like counters, okay? But this is good. This is fine, okay? This little piece right here, like, it might make a little bit more sense if you said, if we were to assign it to a variable just to give it a name, like halfway point,
Middle number.
right? And then we grab the halfway point, right? That adds some clarity to it for the reader, instead of just like, oh, what are they doing here? What is John doing? Why would he do this? I don't understand. But now, even just creating a variable and putting that into a variable adds some clarity, because now I've got some comments here. Or I can put a comment. A comment would be fine too. Questions? Okay, next up, let's do the other half, the even half. What I do know about the even half, based on line 14, what line 14 is telling me, it's returning a new array. So, of length 2. So I should probably create a new array to return. And I'm probably going to return that new array. Okay, so the real stuff is happening in between here. And again, I should train myself back to using const all the time. It's going to be very similar to this. And I know that because I'm either going to land, if I divide by 2, I'm either landing here or I'm going to land here. On the 4 or on the 3. I don't know which one yet, so let's figure it out. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I divide 6 by 2, which is right to find the halfway point, I get 3, so I'm landing here. Okay, so if I divide an even number by 2, I land on the second element of my array, which means maybe if I just took that one and minus 1, I can go back and get the previous one as well. So it's no longer array.length minus 1. It's array.length to give me 3 in that case, divided by 2. So this will give me the one on the right. This will give me the one on the left. And then my new array is going to be actually here. This is what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to declare this. So what you could do, yeah, let's do this. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we figured out the right side of middle. That index, this is an index. Okay, this is the index. This is not the value, this is not the element, just the index. So here, this is the index. This is 3 in this case. In that case, it's 4. And 2 is line 6, value 2. Then I take my array 3 and get the element out of there. My array 2 and get the element out of there. Put them into element 0 and element 1 of the new array and return the new array. Yeah.
So you had me until you started changing what you were calling them, and then
Changing what I was calling.
like where you started calling that one halfway point. Maybe I'm just not keeping up. You lost me there.
So all I did was took the value from here, took this out of here, and assigned it to a variable to try to make it more clear about what this is. So what's in, okay, so what's in here? What is this? What is this? What does this expression evaluate to?
It's the halfway point. And I understand.
No. It is the halfway point, but what does this expression evaluate to? That's the critical part, right? Knowing that. If you don't know that, then explaining other stuff isn't going to help, right? This evaluates to the index, right? We said my array.length minus 1, so in this case, my array.length. My array.length is 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 minus 1 divided by 2, which is 2. And that is the, so this halfway point is 2. And then I'm selecting the element at index 2, which element is at index 2? 0, 1, 2. So this is selecting index, the element at index 2, which is the number 3. And all these are doing, these ones here, exactly the same thing. This is returning an index, just like this was returning an index. This one's returning when we have this one, this longer one. This one is returning 0, 1, 2, 3. Line 5, the right side of middle is the number 3. Left side of middle is the number 2. And I called them that because this is the middle. And then lines 8 and 9 are saying select element 2, 0, 1, 2 from this array, which is the number 3. And lines 9 is saying select element at index 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, which is the number 4. Take those two, that 3 and that 4, and create a new array with it. Element 0, new array, element 0 being 3. And new array, element 1 being 4. Okay, does that help? And then we're returning the new array. Right.
So I'm just thinking, you can make the new array for the 1 equals 2 for the even one, and make the new array a function, and then use filters to make it become a new array.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, totally. Can you use a method that returns a new array and filter out everything that's not at these indexes? Yeah, sure. I think that might be a little bit more complex than you need. What I would probably, in reality, this is what I would probably do.
Yep.
So I don't have to create a new array and put it in a variable. I can just return
An array.
a new array, and then the values are right. We said before, this whole expression ends up being the number 3, and this whole expression ends up being the number 4, and that's all that's happening here. Yeah.
But I think in the way you teach and preach, if you did it the way that you just did it, I have no idea what it means.
No, I know. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I just want to show you, like, that's what I might do in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this new array because I do want you to understand this part. That I don't need to declare a variable with an array in it
Just return it.
to return an array. I can just return an array with new stuff in it. Like, I can just return an array like this. And that will return, sorry, that matches. That works. But it doesn't work for everything. It only works for these. So now, I'm just going to replace that. Sorry. Wait, did I not use right side of middle? No, I didn't. Yeah, I'm just going to replace it with this. So I do want you to understand this. That I can do this. Let's just do this. Okay. We'll just do this. My goal is more of understanding the problem than getting hooked on the syntax. Okay. Arrow functions. No problems with the arrow function. Line 2.
Need to practice because sometimes it looks different when I look at the documentation.
Yeah, sometimes it's in one line. I'll do a one-liner.
Yeah.
They're all in one line.
The
I'll
ones
do a
I saw
one-liner
were-
again.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to understand it in the documentation,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
I felt like I was, like I get it, like I have the answer. I just was following you better before we started like relabeling.
So the only reason why I didn't relabel things, I just labeled things. So before they didn't have a label. They were just, it was just my array dot length minus 1 divided by 2. Like, all I did was take this out of here and put it in a variable and then put that variable here. That's all I did. Right? Like, this is all I did. Right, so all I did, I went from here, which is, this is a number, and I decided to take that number and instead put it in a variable, and then put that variable in here purely for better understanding. Right, like, do you understand that this is a number?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, and that number is in here.
Right.
And then this is also, so then this is a number, and this is, so then this is a number.
Could you run it without doing that?
Sure, of course. Like, do you want me to run it without doing that? The answer is the same. But it's,
So like if I submitted something that didn't change things, it would still be fine?
if you submitted something that,
Didn't like
It is like this.
yeah.
of course. I'm doing this purely for a better understanding from you, so I can actually label things, and you can look at this later and say, oh, like, let's call this halfway index, like, or like, I don't know what I can label it then.
No, I understand why you did it, I was just saying that's where I got.
Okay, so my recommendation, sit on this after, okay? Take some time to review it until you understand what's going on, okay? And so if we run this, four, 4, 5. Okay?
Not possible. For me, between 9 and 10. The lines 9 and 10. I tried to do new array and my array, then in the same square brackets, left side of middle, comma, right side. It didn't work.
Like new array equals equals
Yeah.
array.
No.
Oh,
No.
comma.
No.
No.
There. In the brackets. In the square brackets. On the left side. I just made one.
Because
line.
it's waiting for you to assign something to it, right? When after an array's been declared, and then you do this, start doing this.
No. Sorry. I didn't explain that.
Sorry.
I tried. I did the same, but in one line. New array. Just square brackets. Then equals my array, and in the
Yeah,
same
this-
bracket.
So like this. No.
No.
Okay,
No,
I-
you can see just.
Okay, I'll take a look at it.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, just write this down as remember to ask me. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, and I'm gonna move on. I also alternatively, you can just use push. Okay, and push that value onto new array if you wanted to. Other way. Alright. Flip flops. So this is very similar to the last one from yesterday, except this time we are flipping the characters, flipping the first and last characters. So we have, I give you a string, and all you gotta do is flip the first and last characters. That's it. Okay? So yesterday we solved this already. Except we took off the first and last characters. This time we're not taking off the first and last characters. We're going to flip the first and last characters. But let's go grab that solution because there's definitely some good work in there. So I do this a lot. I usually will do something on a project, and then the next project, something similar will come up, and I'll be like, oh, I have some of the work already, I'm 3/4 of the way there, I'm just gonna go back to that project and grab it. And so, that was this one. I'm just gonna paste it in here for now, and we're gonna fix it up. It's called flip chars, flip characters. So I'm gonna rename it, flip characters. I'm gonna change this from a function expression to an arrow function expression. So I'm gonna take off the word function, I'm gonna take off these parentheses, and I'm gonna put an arrow there. So what this first piece does is it creates a copy of the string, if you remember, creates a copy of the string, but it starts at 1 and it goes to length -1. So it's essentially taking that string and it's starting at 1 and it's going this far only. Starting at 1, so not 0. So it's not taking that first letter, and not all the way to the end, so it's not taking that last letter. And it loops over it. Standard loop. Concatenation. Building up that string, the copy, which starts empty. And we're adding Y, capital S, T, R, N, and then stop. And that's what's inside copy by the time this loop is done. So by the time this loop is done, copy has Y, S, T, R, I, N. And for the previous problem, that was perfect. That's what we wanted. So we returned that. But for this one, that's not what we want. We want to use those first and last letters. Well, that's really easy, right? What index is the first letter of a string on, or first character of a string.
Always 0.
Always 0. So I want to put that character at the end here, right? I want to concatenate it to the end. So if I were to do this, I would get y_strin plus m, right? Because I didn't modify the original string. I still have that original string. And I can grab the front character. And over here, how do I get the last character all the time? Length. But remember length. Length is too far.
Yeah.
Because what's the length of this array here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
5. What's at index 5?
Undefined.
0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 is over here, undefined. So it's never, and that's that dance we have to do.
Yeah, minus
right?
1.
Length
Minus
minus
one.
1. Okay, so we take some string. And we're getting the character at some string dot length minus 1. And we're adding it to the front. So then what essentially we get is this plus whatever was in here, which is this, plus this. And again, just to be exceptionally readable, I don't suggest that you necessarily do this. You can return this just fine. But to be exceptionally readable, I can say this. Or better yet, and sorry, that should go first character at the end and the last character at the beginning. So I'm being a lot more clear in my variable naming, maybe to a fault. So I have a string without first and last, which starts off as empty. I'm building that up. So by the time I'm done this loop, I have that. I go get my first character, I go get my last character, and then I return last character plus the string without first and last character, and the first character. And I end up with nothing because I didn't console out anything. Questions? Again, if you see, like, there's lots of shortcuts I can be taking here. So if you completed this in a different way and it's much more terse, shorter, fewer lines, that no problem. Okay, I just want to post this because I think this might be a little bit. I feel like if I start writing things like this, it's a little bit easier to go back and read. Okay, and again, that's the understanding I want. But usually, anywhere there's these variables, I could have just taken this and put them right in there, and just return that. Okay. Getting rid of trios. So this is now a little bit different because we're going to start using array methods. Write a function that will accept an array as a parameter. The function will use arrays filter method to remove all the strings that are longer than 3 characters. Your function should return this new array. So I'm asking you to do 2 things. Write a function, use a method. Okay, so you need to write a function less than 4 characters. So let's write that function out. Const less than 4 characters, chars. We're going to do an arrow function here, so we're going to take in an array. Let's call it words, because it's an array of words. And arrow key, arrow, curly brace. Okay. Inside of here, we are going to use the filter function on this array of words. Words.filter. Words is an array. It's that array. And what are we getting rid of? Or better yet, what are we keeping? Right? That's the question. What are you getting rid of? What are we keeping?
More than 4 characters.
Word length greater than 3. So, I'll do this in 2 different ways. I'll comment one out after. I'll do this using a function, an anonymous inline function expression first. Filter takes a function and as we saw yesterday, I can give it 1, 2, or 3 parameters. But in this case, how many do I want? How many do I need? I guess the question is, what information do I need? Just the element. I don't need the index. I don't need the array. I just need to know the element. Because I'm simply going to be asking this element, each element, are you bigger than 3 characters or are you less than 3 characters? That's it. So I don't need to know what index they're at. I don't need to know what array they belong to. I just need to know the element itself. So we can say word. We can say ELE. We can say E. Okay, that's a little on the short side. But I'm gonna say word. If the array is a bunch of words, then each one is a word. So filter requires that I tell it. All filter needs to know is true or false. Are we keeping it? Are we getting rid of it? That's all filter needs to know. But I have to tell filter that, which means I have to return that to filter. So I need to return true or false to filter. Return true, filter keeps the element. Return false, filter throws it away. And word saying, is the word less than, is word.length less than 4 characters? Is word.length less than 4? True, return true. Is word.length 4 or greater? Sorry, 5? 4, 5, 6, 4 or greater? False, return false. What does filter return? What does filter itself return?
Array.
A new array. So filter returns a new filtered array that will only contain things, and no console log. Fluent I. So this is what it looks like as an arrow function. This is what it looks like, sorry, this is what it looks like as a function expression. Here's what it looks like as an arrow function. When you do an arrow function on one line, like I have here, when you do an arrow function on one line and you drop those curly parentheses, those curly braces, it automatically returns the value of the expression, automatically, implicitly. We don't need to say return, only when you do it on one line. If I do it on two lines, like I was doing with this, multiple lines, if I put these curly braces there, then I must manually return it. But if I do it on one line, the return is automatic. Okay? That's the big difference between arrow functions and arrow function expressions and regular function expressions. By the time we get there, I won't have to cover this anymore. Okay? Honestly, this is really what I would do. I wouldn't even assign it to a variable, because I'm just assigning it to a variable and then returning the variable. I would just do this. Right? Because this is an array. This expression, after all of this stuff, is like unpack, do this, then do this, then do this. At the end of the day, what I have highlighted here is this array. I just choose not to assign it to a variable and return that variable. Right? If this returns an array and I'm putting that array inside this variable, and then I'm returning that variable, why don't I just return that array directly? Right? But I'll do it like this, just for completion, for completeness.
Okay, but the return is not necessary.
No, the return is necessary. The fact that we're putting it in a variable and then simply returning that variable is not necessary.
Okay.
Right, like this, I'm essentially saying this. Why don't I just say this? Is what I'm saying. Right? I mean, this eventually breaks down to be this. So why put it in here only to return that, is what I'm saying. So we can just go right into, just return it. This makes more sense to you? Again, one of the reasons why you might put in a variable is just to provide clarity to someone reading it, saying like, oh, okay, I get it. That's the middle of the array. That's the first number. That's the tax rate. They're not just things that you're pulling out of your ass, right? They mean something. They have meaning. And when you create meaning around the context of the problem, it helps the person have a better frame of reference for what's going on. Of course, you're that person, but you're yourself reading your code. But you should be used to now reading someone else's code, my code, right? And you see, it's not always easy to read someone else's code and follow along. So it's not always easy for me or your colleagues to read your code. So we do things sometimes like this purely for an explicit purpose. You missed it.
What did I miss?
The arrow function thingy.
It's okay.
Okay.
I got
We'll
that.
catch you on the next one.
I got it right here.
You got it right there? Oh no, these ones are going on my pay channel.
Oh.
I have a pay channel.
I
I
see.
have a
Subscription
service.
based, eh?
Yeah.
I feel like
And I
we
got
should
2%
get like
cut.
access to that.
2%?
Given
Come on,
that
you
we
gotta
spend-
ask for the
Well, I'll post it just in, just post it on Moodle. Yeah, you already included in your tuition. I forgot. I always try to get a little extra.
No, tuition only includes up to the gold membership. This is platinum.
This is platinum. Yeah.
At least you didn't write your own book and make us buy it.
Yeah.
Almost.
You of them.
If I wrote a
I
book,
know.
I would. You know what though? The books, like, I have had professors that wrote their own book and sold it for like $20.
Okay.
Oh,
That's cool.
Yeah, and it was awesome. It was
I-
bound with
I
like just a
never
spiral. The book
experienced
sucked. Like the quality of the book sucked. It was all like just photocopied, and then like bound with those spiral bounds
Oh, yeah. But the
and like a
content.
cardboard front and back. But it was like this thick, and so we bought that for $20 instead of buying the $125 calculus, the red calculus book that everyone has, right? Like, and that book was way better, way better. So I'm paying for the paper essentially.
Yeah,
There.
and that makes sense. Or like the thoughts, I get it, but like.
But if I was the author of like a hardcover like textbook and then like this is the book that we're using.
You should see for
I had a
$25.
professor in
When you go to
Forsyth
university
who
there, they
like
make you
charged
take
us
a bunch
like
of courses.
$200 for his book,
For you,
and then in
like
class he
psychology,
just
like that.
read us the
Test was
book.
$200
I'm like, why did I pay for
Between-
both? Right? Like the class and the book.
No, exactly. And then the one with
yeah.
psychology is the most of the time is
Finding the
was
First
like,
Prime.
They wrote it. So then they don't even use
So-
the book because they just lecture.
Same pattern again, ish. Same pattern ish. We're going to.
That was the question two.
This is question 2. This is question 3.
No, this is.
Oh, mega multiply. Okay. I've got a lot of stuff. I'm going slow today. It's okay. I'm in no rush. Mega multiply. Okay, this is a tricky one. So we're going to do the same thing. First, I'm going to put a console.log here so I don't look like a fool at the end, because I know I'm going to need to print that out. I'm going to write a function, const multiply equals numbers, which is an array of numbers, arrow function, curly braces, and we are going to construct a new array with map. So here's how I'm going to look at it now. Instead of, I know we're using map because I said to use map. What does map return? A new array. So I'm just going to say this to start. Return numbers.map. So I know for sure I'm using map on numbers, and I'm getting an array back from that, and I'm returning it. Awesome. So I'm like 3/4 of the way there already. Well, no, I'm like 1/4 of the way there. I need to fill in map. Okay, I need to fill this part of it here. The rest of this is just syntax. Right? This is just syntax. We haven't solved anything yet. We haven't solved the problem. And the problem is, I need to multiply each number by its previous one, except for the first one. So the way map works is map will create, if you remember yesterday right at the end of class, I did it with true. I just returned true. Well, first of all, map takes a function, and it gives me up to 3 pieces of information. The number, the element, the index, and the array. Whether or not I use those 3, that's up to me. Let's see what this looks like as an arrow function. Something with 3 parameters. That's it. And map requires that I return something because it's creating a new array. It needs to know what I want to put in that new array. It's going to build up that array. That array that it builds is going to be the same length of the array I gave it. So if the array I gave it is 10, the new array is going to be size 10. For every time it runs, it's adding a new element to that new array until it reaches the end and we're done. So I definitely need element. I pretty much need element every time. Element is not, it technically is optional, but like if you didn't take it, why are you using these methods? It doesn't make any sense. Okay. So if I return true, I end up with true, 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 true. Not ideal. Not what I want. So I need to return numbers, obviously. If it's the first number,
Just itself.
just itself, right? Because I say, take the number, look to the left, and multiply myself by the number on the left, unless the number on the left is undefined. And actually, a more generic approach would be if I guess if here we need index. We need index because we need to know what position we're talking about, right? If we're in first, if we're in the first position, how do we know that? The way that we know that is by the index. If I'm at index 0. So if index equals 0, then
return
return
index 0.
element.
You misspelled return.
Okay? Then return element, which is the value. 1, 2, 3, but it's only ever going to be 1 because that's the one at index 0. Otherwise, return the element. So pretend now I'm at 2. I'm at 2 because I'm not at 0. So let's go to 2. 2 times what?
The previous index.
2 times the element at the previous index. How do I get that?
Index minus
Index minus
Index minus 1, but that is not an element, that's now just a number. Array, right? That third piece here, that gives me the original array. So 2 times the element in the array that's located at index minus 1, which in this case is 0, like index 0, which is 1. 2 times 1. 3 times 2. And run that. 1, 2, 6, 12. 1, 2, 6, 12. Now this is the arrow. I'm only gonna do this arrow function. I'm not gonna do the function expression equivalent because it is literally just this. That's the only difference. I mean, I'll put it up there. I'll comment it out. I'll put it up there just so you can see how similar it is. Okay. Q4. finding the first prime. Okay, again. How do we find a prime? Pretty sure we've done this before, right? Okay, so let's go find that. Where did we find a prime? Class 7? Exercise 7? Exercise 6? GCD, calculating primes. Line number 2, question 2. Is prime number? So we have that function already written from a previous exercise. So let's not rebuild it. Instead, let's just take a quick look at it to make sure we understand and make a couple tweaks, right? Because the logic, the big idea, the logic to solve the problem is the same. It's just we probably don't want to alert things. Okay? So I don't want to alert. And all this does is it checks to see if it's a prime, and it returns true or false. I'm sure glad that we weren't console logging something here. Because now, because we're not console logging something in this function is prime number, now we can reuse it. I'm just gonna paste it here, and I'm gonna leave it, and I'm gonna use it. I'm not gonna add to it. I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna mix this function declaration with the function expression with an arrow function, because it doesn't matter. A little bit of bad practice, you probably wanna be more or less consistent. If you're gonna use arrow function, well, no, that's not necessarily true. They all have their advantages. And they all have their kind of special abilities. So we're gonna leave this is prime number here, because this tells me if a number is prime. My goal is to use find to find the first prime number. Throw my console log on here, start. I need to write a function called find first prime, and we're going to take an array of numbers, arrow function. Okay. And what are we returning? We are returning the first found number. And if you were to check the documentation for find, like we did yesterday, you would see that find returns a value from the array, the first one that it finds that matches. It's kind of like filter, except instead of creating a new array of these items, it just gives you back the first one that it finds. Which might be good or bad, right? Like, maybe you don't want the first one. Maybe you want the last one, or maybe you want a specific one. So find might not always be what you're looking for. We don't have the logic yet, but let's do the logic. So you might have done your prime check inside of here, but I have this awesome function that finds primes. I like to take these things out, because now I have a function that finds primes and I can use it for other things. Instead of being stuck inside a function that finds the first prime of an array. Now I have multiple options. I have something that finds the first prime of an array. I have something that just tells me if a number is prime or not. I broke it out into pieces. So I'm not stuck with two things. I'm not stuck with one big function that only does one thing. Now I have smaller functions that do individual things, and I can put them together to do the big thing. So number stuff, fine. This, just like every other array function out there, pretty much takes a function. We'll use an arrow function. And again, same thing, element, index, array, but all we need here is the element because we don't care about its index. And we're checking to see, we're find cares about true or false. Return true if you found it. Return false if, did it pass the test that you're looking for? Is this what you're looking for? Yes or no? That's what find wants. True or false? Yes or no? So, what are we looking for? Is prime number element. This returns true or false. Return false, return true. We wrote this, so we already know that it returns true or false. And so let's leverage it. Is prime number element? And, hey, we know this. This is one line. If I move this over here, I can get rid of this return. And there you go. Oh shit, actually. And hey, this is one line. I can move this over here. I'll undo that. But it's just funny that you can. The whole thing is one line. And then, oh, why do I even bother? I can just console log that. Just undo this. Okay. So this is what it looks like from, I'll do it as a function expression, and I'll do it as an arrow function. Programmers get really excited when they can make their code smaller. It's this addiction, so it's called, the term is called golfing, because the idea is you make your code, you make your code to solve a problem the least amount of characters possible, right? In golf, the idea is to get the shortest score, smallest score possible. The idea, that's where the term comes from. We're trying to solve the problem in the least amount of characters possible. No, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. It's just like this addiction that programmers often have. It's like, how can I make this one line of code? How can I do this in one line of code? But that's not good practice, because usually one line of code is hard to read, especially if you're doing a lot of stuff. Okay, let's pause here. Let's take a break, we'll come back, we'll solve the other few, then we'll talk, then we'll do some practice. We'll talk, we'll go to lunch, we'll talk some more, then we'll do some practice.
So, I imagine that like coders, like programmers
Hey.
probably have,
I think so.
if you're working
Thanks.
on
We'll
similar projects every time, that you have like an index, just like every JavaScript sheet just starts the same. Just like,
Which one's the one
I
you
have
just
like
did?
these 40 functions that I know I'm gonna use 100 times.
No, like, I don't know how often I check for prime. It's not very often.
No, but
you'll solve, sometimes the problems are so simple that you'll just like rewrite it.
Right.
Other times you'll be like, oh, like I said, I did this already in this previous project. You won't pull over everything you need. You kind of have this internal built up library in your head of things that you've done before, because you remember the pains, you remember the struggles, you remember the projects. We do have what we call boilerplate, where we know that we want these things on every project. It's typically not a group of functions, but maybe we did enhance add a bunch of useful functions to string that we'd like to have, yeah, that would be something that you carry over. Or like numbers, or like, because sometimes we'll extend. JavaScript, for example, JavaScript doesn't have, like you can't do 15.isPrime. So maybe you add isPrime to that, you extend JavaScript and add this, and you carry that library along. Yeah, that's totally possible. Some people do.
It's probably, yeah, that's kind of like Bulma then, right? Like you have a sheet that you all kind of.
You all
know,
kinda use-
I see button, I know basically what
Yeah,
she did.
exactly. And yeah, it's not uncommon necessarily for, it's not uncommon for an office to have like boilerplate that has these built set of functions, and oftentimes people will then release them as libraries, like Bulma. Bulma probably came out of an office that was like trying to get everyone to use the same thing, and so they built up this kind of boilerplate skeleton, and then like, let's release this to open source. Because people are like,